Great.
You'll be sick of the sound of this.
Just check this one.
Matt's on his way up. He'll be at any moment. Promise.
So I don't know how many times you've seen that now, Paul. That's probably my third time of this one, and it's still hits you so hard every time. How are you doing with all of these screenings? I know we've been seeing each other at a few of these now.
No, I'm okay. I normally sneak in for the last 10 minutes, but I actually sat through that one. And it's always interesting, always springs up different memories every time I watch it. A lot of the time I'm actually laughing while everyone else is sitting there going, ugh, because I know the bits that happen just before the bad bits and just after. And they were, with Marie, you know, they were really actually quite funny times. So it's good and bad mixed in.
Well, I'll maybe ask you a couple of specific questions for you, and then we'll broaden the discussion as soon as we have Matt join us in a minute. So, to you, how does this compare? Your experience being involved in this and the other film, of course, that's come out, A Private War, which is the dramatized version, the biopic that my colleague mentioned earlier. How do you think together that these two films tell the story?
They both tell it really. You know, I people were worried initially, thinking that they might be competing with each other, but you know, in many ways they really do complement each other. And you know, A Private War gets out to an audience that wouldn't necessarily come and see a documentary. So I've always said, you know, anything. That's why I wrote the book. That's why I made this. Was to keep telling their story, keep telling the Syrian people's story, and A Private War does just that. It takes it to a much larger audience, and yeah, I mean, working on it with different things. I had to cope with Jamie Dornan, which wasn't a bad thing.
That can't be such a terrible experience.
I've had worse. But no, I mean, Matt. Oh, you here, Matt? You just hiding? There he is. I won't talk about him now, he's here. Ladies and gentlemen, Matt Heineman. I thought you were wearing your gold cape tonight, Matt.
Thanks so much for joining us. We just got started kind of talking about how the two films together really have been for Paul. I'd like to ask you the same question, actually, sort of. Were you aware of how this was shaping up when you were working on A Private War? And I'd be interested in particular in how you made the decisions and how to approach that one compared to this. I think for me the big difference was the focus on Marie's personal story more in the other one. How do you think, what was that experience like for you, and how do you think they've been coming up kind of together and getting this attention together?
They being both films?
Both films,
yeah, I mean, I think, you know, it was sort of very fortuitous that both films were coming out at the same time, and you know, my background is in documentary film, so this was my first narrative film, and for me, I really wanted to focus on, Marie and sort of what drives somebody to go to the most dangerous place on earth, and then what that did to her mentally and physically, and to really examine that was what I was trying to do. And obviously, our film ends where, to some degree, where, you know, Paul's film, you know, starts. So.
Yes, and this one, I think that's the difference for me with this one too, is how much more of your story this one told. What's that like for you to watch?
I mean, it's as I said, you know, I kind of watch it now with them other little visions of Marie in mind. I've started, you know, I can't really keep watching it and keep letting it get to me like it's new every time. And it just reminds me, as does A Private War, when I saw Ros and Jamie sitting doing these scenes from our lives, you know, I just looked, and many times I let myself go, and it was, you know, briefly I was back there. It gave me little parts of Marie back, so I kind of look for them points in it, and not dwell too much on, you know, the horror of losing somebody like that. And like I said, with mine, when I see these bits, I sometimes have a good laugh because I know what was happening around it, and the same with A Private War. And you know, Rosamund catches Marie so incredibly, you know, she inhabits Marie, she becomes Marie. So that's a rare and unusual thing to see that being played out, you know. So I never take anything bad from both of them, you know. She died, but you know, we were there to tell the story of what was happening in Syria, and that's what I make of it. That's what I try every day when I do these talks or do anything. It's to keep telling their story because it's still happening.
It's still happening, and maybe if I can share some Reporters Without Borders figures, this is a country where now 241 journalists have been killed since Marie. Vast majority are Syrian journalists whose cases don't get this level of attention at the international level. The country is ranked 177th out of 180 countries in our World Press Freedom Index. If anything, if there could be a call to action from these films, and Matt, and you've of course done another film on Syria as well, City of Ghosts, that focuses on the citizen journalist group, Raqqa is being slaughtered silently. What would you hope the call to action would be of these films, of Lindsay Hilsum's book, of all the attention that's coming out now to these cases?
I mean, I think, you know, one of the reasons that I made A Private War was, you know, my mom was a journalist. I grew up in the world of journalism and documentary film, and for me the film is an homage not just to Marie but to journalism and the importance of journalism, real journalism, and especially in the country that I'm from, where journalists are being vilified and demonized, you know, and as we've seen with the targeted killing of Jamal Khashoggi, you know, journalists are under attack, and so I think it's such an important issue of our time and to examine and to shed light on. And you know, I hope that to some small degree the film does what Marie tried to do, which is, you know, shed light and give voice to the voiceless, to tell the stories of, you know, innocent civilians who are so often caught in the crossfire of these geopolitical conflicts, and to get people to, for a moment, stop and think and ponder the world that we're living in. I have no sort of delusional aspirations that this film is going to change the situation in Syria, but I hope, like I did with City of Ghosts, that the film will at least get people to stop and think about it for a little bit and care, and empathize. You know, I think, you know, Paul's film shows this, and, you know, Private War shows this as well, but I think one of the things that made Marie brilliant was her ability to create that empathetic connection between issues that might seem so far away but aren't, by making them feel like, you know, that could be your brother or your sister or your mother. And yeah, I think that's also something that haunted her. You know, am I making a difference? Are these words making a difference? Sorry, I don't know if I answered your question. But
I think now, at this present time as well, it's a really, you know, could it be any more dangerous for Syria? Yes, it could, because what's happening, we're beginning to see the kind of slow rehabilitation of Assad back into the international community, despite, you know, 12 million displaced people, 500,000 dead. And I think, you know, people really ought to pay attention and not allow the injustice for them Syrian people to now be put back in the box, and have these people back, and our politicians and our business people who are starting to look at reconstructing Syria and getting Assad back. You know, that's a really dangerous turn it's taken. So I think the timing's good now, because that is what we're seeing now. That, you know, while ISIS were tearing their heart out of Syria in one part of the country, Assad just carried on what he was doing. You know, Homs, Aleppo, Douma, Ghouta, the same process was used. Reduce it to rubble, ship them out to Idlib. Idlib is in the process of going through what them other places went through now. And when that's over, it's so important that he's held to account. And you know, the timing's great because it gives a lot of people a voice to talk about this. And, you know, our politicians have to be very careful about what they get up to now. We've just won the court case in America.
I was going to mention that. Could you talk a bit about that and the impact?
You know, I mean, that's we started the case 5 years ago, because I said all along it was a deliberate targeting, and Marie's sister Kat got Scott Gilmore and the Centre for Justice and Accountability, and over 5 years we collected a massive evidence from defectors, eyewitnesses, and presented it to an American judge who ruled that this was a targeted assassination of a journalist. Now, that many people think that's lucky. We've got the resources to do that, but we're open to take that case and that ruling and turn the prison back onto this regime who've committed these crimes, and it does give us that opportunity. So fortuitous all through with both films. Marie Lindsay's book, the court ruling. It's dangerous days for the Syrian people again, who've had to go through all of that and now suffer the indignity of having this guy back and swaggering around, dangerous times.
Well, you mentioned that when you're watching the film, sometimes the funny parts before or after. Could you give us an example maybe of something that was very heavy for us to watch, but something lighthearted that happened?
Just after, I told you this one, just after we did them interviews on CNN, and Marie did that, we got into our little room at the back of the building. It was a tiny little room, and I just covered Marie in blankets and carpets, and she's laying there, and I get my blankets and carpets on. It's about 1 o'clock. She goes, "Paul, I think I'm going deaf." And I was like, "What?" I said, "You're already half blind, and now you're going deaf." I said, "It's not looking good." So I said, "Stay there." I got me phone with me, a light on it, and I was looking in her ear, and I said, "Fucking hell, hang on." And I got a matchstick and me light, and I was rooting, I was going in deep, and she's going, what is it? And I'm going, "Stay still." And eventually I pulled this thing out of her ear, and I held it up, and she goes, "What the fuck's that?" And I'm going, "That." When she did the CNN interview on Skype, I lent her a set of earphones, and it was the rubber bud of the earphone was still in her ear. And it was like, we were just pissing ourselves laughing. And we were trying to get asleep to go to the field clinic the next morning. And every time one of us nearly got asleep, the other one would burst out laughing. And it'd be like, shh, we gotta get up. And so when I see all of them scenes, I'm sitting, yeah, but you don't know about I'm going deaf. Yeah, and that was probably our last real moments together, because when we woke up, we were straight into that corridor worrying about snipers and French, and then boom. So yeah, that's a really fun memory. So when everyone else is sitting there going, "Oh," I'm going, dreaming about Marie's ear.
Well, Matt, now I have to ask, what was it like having Paul around when you were making A Private War?
It was amazing. He was supposed to be there he was a consultant. He was supposed to be there for 3 days, and he never left.
It was a really nice hotel.
Yeah, we couldn't.
I was living in a van at the time, so I wasn't going anywhere, mate.
Yeah, we couldn't get rid of him. No, he was incredible. He was such an inspiration, obviously, to Jamie Dornan, who plays him in the film, but to Rosamund, who plays Marie, and to myself, and to every single department. He helped. One of my main goals was a level of authenticity, not just to who Marie was, but to the war zones that we were inhabiting and portraying. And so, he was just incredibly helpful at every step along the way, and helping me achieve that authenticity and just sort of a living, breathing example of why we're making this film. And I worked with almost predominantly non-actors in all the different war zones. So when we're in Syria, in Homs, they're real Syrian refugees who are living in Jordan where we're shooting. The day that we shot the final scene of the film, you guys didn't show the film, right?
We didn't show that.
Yeah, so no one was on. The final scene of the film is when she dies, and that morning that we shot that scene, I held a moment of silence for Marie, for the 500,000 civilians who've been killed since then. And these two big burly guys, one who was a stuntman and one who was an extra, came up just bawling, crying, and gave Paul a huge hug. And they remembered him from the media center. They were there with him. So, he just was.
It was, the what that brought to the film is just incredible. These people from Homs on set, and Matt can tell you a lot better than the process of finding them people. But that opened my eyes to, this wasn't the Hollywood I expected. This was just so touching. The fact that these were the people who'd been there. And people were coming up. Remember the guy pulled his jumper up and he was just full of bullet holes. And he said, yeah, he'd been in the field clinic, and it was just this amazing atmosphere on the set. You know, I mean, it added so much to it. All of them people, all of the women and the children in the widow's basement, you know, weren't actors. They were refugees from Syria. So incredible, you know, the amount of effort that went into that detail, which, you know, I think when you see it, you'll appreciate just what it brings to it.
Something that I've always been struck by in my interactions with you, Paul, and seeing you speak at other things, is your constant positivity despite having been through this hell. And I know here tonight we do have colleagues who have known journalists who have been killed. We have journalists who are exiled from their own countries, who may have been to prison in their countries. What message would you have to them about staying positive and going forward? How have you been able to do that, and do you have any advice for others?
Well, look, you know, I found a simple way through. When I came out, I never really felt, it wasn't a case of I got out and I thought, right, that period of my life is over. You know, I never felt that assignment ended. I came out and I was in hospital, and I just said, open the doors, let the press in. And it didn't feel that comfortable. You know, no journalist, I think, likes becoming the story. But it did give me the opportunity to speak out and keep speaking out about what I'd seen. And I think that's the way I've dealt with it. It's just, you have to, you know, if you stop and you start feeling sorry for yourself. I had Marie on one shoulder going, what the hell are you doing? You know, and that's quite inspirational. You know, you think, Marie coming back, having a go at you. You just have to make something positive out of it. And if you don't, then these people win. You know, these dictators, these people who operate in the shadows, they've won if you're silenced. And you know, and I think all journalists, you know, the last thing we need is silence, and at this point in time. So I just think, you know, keep telling your stories, keep fighting the fight. Otherwise, these people will win, and the world will be a darker place for it.
I think we'll open it up to the audience for some questions now, and I know my colleagues have also collected some questions on social media, so maybe we could take a few in person and then read some of those. Does anybody have any questions? We have a mic over here at the back.
Hello, this is for Paul. Have you ever been back to Syria, and do you know anything about people who stayed behind that night, and do you know what happened to them?
I was back in Syria last weekend, I think, rather strangely. I was in Iraq and Syria for 5 days, and I got into the northeast with the Peshmerga for 5 days. I did keep in contact and try to keep in contact with as many people as I can, but sadly over the years those numbers have dwindled, and occasionally, ever so occasionally, I'll get a message out. Dr. Mohammed is still alive and going. He's still working, and you know, God bless that man. But there are a few left, but sadly not enough. You know, they've been pushed about all over the country, and it's taken its toll. So we try, but only a handful now.
I think there was another question just in front of you. Or
sorry.
You have the mic.
Yeah.
Oh.
So just wanted to quickly say what an honor it is to be talking to you. I still can't believe you are alive, sitting in front of us. I'm so glad that you are. My question is that what would you think would be one call for action for ordinary journalists like myself, and also maybe for the governments of the so-called free world, not to let this criminal regime get away with what they've done, now that it seems that they might get away with all of this, because the narrative now is that, you know, they can get away with it so long as it stops the war now and it saves life. So what's the counter narrative to that? If we continue asking for the accountability, then there's always the risk that the war starts again or something.
Okay, we've got my barrister who got the case through in the States and won, they've come up with a rather crafty way of getting a referral to the ICC. And with the case of the Rohingyas 2 years ago, Myanmar was not a signatory to the ICC. The Guernica group, who my barrister kind of runs, they were the people who persuaded the ICC into accepting the Myanmar case because of the crimes began in Myanmar and spilled over into Bangladesh, and Bangladesh is a signatory. And so the chief prosecutor accepted the case that they would hold an investigation for war crimes. He went back about 10 days ago and got the prosecutor and said, I'm doing exactly the same with Syria and with Jordan, and it looks like 95% chance that we'll get a referral bypassing the UN and the Security Council on this technicality. So that's happening now. We need as much international support for this. You know, the more countries, I'm hitting the Foreign Office in London like they won't believe. And I think if your journalists tell your people that, you know, the more support these governments give, the more chance that we actually see them and this isn't for 1 or 2 cases. This is for over 500,000 people. This case can get there, and it takes it away from them shifty little shits on the Security Council who veto everything that moves. It moves it, it bypasses it, and it's a really good chance of getting the regime held to account. So any journalist, write about that, find about it, I'll put it up and push it, because the more governments that come up, you know, the ICC need the money, they need the funding to hold the investigation. So it's quite complex, but it's possible, and it's actually within reach now. So write about it and tell people.
Matt, would you have anything to add to that about how journalists can be helpful?
With the case?
Yeah.
I mean, who in here is raise your hand if you're a journalist?
Is what?
A journalist
Raise your hand
in the
if you're-
audience. Pretty good amount. Yeah, I mean, what Paul said, just use your channels to write about it, to post about it. You know, I think it was, you know, the case in the US was perhaps largely a symbolic victory. You know, the idea that her family's going to get any of that $302 million of frozen assets by the Assad regime, unclear. But I think it was a, you know, resounding condemnation of the practices of Assad, you know, and silencing opposition voices, and so clearly shows that Marie was deliberately targeted and killed for just reporting on the truth. And so if those are issues that you care about and you think about, write about it, tweet about it, speak about it.
From an advocacy perspective, I'd like to add Reporters Without Borders internationally. We're looking to do more of this to find more ways of achieving criminal and civil liability for crimes against journalists. So we were proud to have supported the US case in this instance, something new that we've done as well. You may have seen last week, we actually called on the ICC to investigate crimes against journalists in Mexico, which has become the deadliest country for journalists that's not at war. And so we're looking for more opportunities always to do that, because it's not just in Syria. Obviously, this is a huge issue in Syria, but impunity for crimes against journalists around the world. Perhaps one more question from the audience for now, and then we can read a few from social media and see where we are with time. Yes?
Yeah. Hey. Would you say that this interview for CNN the night before sealed her fate, that this was the final reason for the shelling of the building?
Look, we found out that they tracked us from Beirut. Hezbollah informed the regime that we were in Beirut. They used high-tech Russian tracking equipment. So we found our names on lists. You know, they really were targeting journalists. Before we went in, we were told that any journalists found in the area of Homs were to be executed. And this was Lebanese intelligence picked up Syrian radio traffic, and they told us, if you go in, anyone found around Homs will be executed and have the bodies thrown on the battlefield. So we were on the list before we went in. Obviously we did rattle a few cages with the CNN, BBC and Channel 4 broadcast. And one of our defective witnesses was in the palace that night. in Damascus, and apparently did have a bit of a hissy fit, and said, take them out. At the same time, one of the people in the media centre's sister gave the information to the regime, was in a car and pointed out the media centre. So it was like all of the planets lined up, and I think that interview was the pressing the go button. Yeah, so there was a direct correlation. But the amount of work they put in, I knew it wasn't an accident. I knew it was deliberate, but I didn't realise just how much time, effort, and money they put into tracking the journalists in Homs. Quite shocking. If you the case, it's all online. Actually, you can see the evidence, and it's quite a read.
Do we have a list of the questions from Twitter and Facebook?
Yes, we have. Maybe I just read two of those. Do you sometimes feel voyeuristic, and how do you get all these images out of your head?
Maybe we'll go to Matt first on this one.
Yeah, I mean, my day job is as a documentary filmmaker, so I'll speak from that chair, I guess. For me, it's all about trust with your subjects. It's all about developing a rapport and an intimacy with people. And the documentaries that I make, I don't just sort of helicopter in and out for 2 or 3 days. I have the fortune, to be honest, to be able to follow people for months and months and months and months, to become part of the fabric of their daily lives. And so, in that sense, I don't feel voyeuristic, because these are people that I know, that know me, and sometimes these are people whose actions I completely disagree with. But I think, as a journalist, as a documentary filmmaker, it's important to show them respect and treat them with respect. And whether it's a meth cook in the middle of Mexico or a suicidal patient at an emergency room. I've filmed in all sorts of extraordinarily intimate and sketchy situations, and I think as long as you're treating people with respect, and I don't really ever feel, I guess, voyeuristic. Yeah.
No, I think Matt sums it up. We're not just rushing in there, kind of, snatching up images that are getting flashed straight onto YouTube or Instagram. It's a serious job, and I think I've never felt voyeuristic. I feel involved, and I feel passionate, and I feel like I really want to tell this story. But no, that's one of the. I don't go to bed worrying about that. As for the images, well, I don't think. No, I don't. They don't pop back up. But I don't think I want to get them out of my mind. That's what drives me to do it more. So now you see terrible things, but you expect to see terrible things. I kind of have a bit of vague protection. I see it through a lens quite often. A journalist will. I used to feel sorry for Marie in some of the scenes we'd see, because I would be kind of going, well, I've got my lens to look through, that protects me a bit. She had the pen and paper. Well, if she remembered them, she had the pen and paper. But she had to witness it, without my meagre degree of protection. But that's what we do, so we can't really come home and then moan about it. That would be a bit wrong. To feel sorry for yourself, no one forced us to go out.
Yeah, I think Paul and I are similar, and I never got to know Marie in person in Afterlife, but I think that's one of the things, especially when I made this documentary Cartel Land, where I was embedded with these vigilantes in Mexico, is I felt an enormous amount of guilt that I had a blue passport, and that blue passport allowed me to leave, and these people had to stay and suffer at the hands of the cartel and the impunity of a corrupt government. And so that's, if there's anything that haunts me more so than a lot of the images that I've seen over the years, it's that ability to sort of come back to New York City and live a life of relative comfort, and especially as you talked about, that's much different than also the journalists that I befriended while making Cartel Land, many of whom have been imprisoned, have been tortured, some of whom have been killed, and dozens of journalists have been killed over the years in Mexico. So.
Did we have any more from social
I
media?
think more or less you answered them all, so it's fine. And I think we should come to an end soon.
Okay.
So
Should we take 2 more from the audience? Will that be okay? Do we
Yeah.
have time? Okay, here's one.
Thank you so much for this riveting, powerful film about bearing witness. My question is about the endangered nature of truth and reality in a world of social media that's spewing lies constantly. And for younger generations who don't know how to tell the difference, what can ordinary journalists do in addition to their ordinary work to try to tip the scales more toward the truth getting out?
Oh, I completely agree. I think we're in a bit of a nightmare situation where, you know, opinion is just masqueraded all over the place as fact, you know, and there is a big difference between fact and opinion. I really don't. It's one, you know, of all of the stories I've covered, the wars I've covered, you know, this is one of the biggest issues I think we face, and you know, there's this whole raft of people who seem to be out there. Not even you know, the whole Twitter kind of news by algorithm thing. You know, a lot of the people I was with in Baba Amra were using Twitter, and so when I was there and seeing it, I thought, my God, what a fantastic tool that these people have to tell their stories. But you know, a few years later, I kind of sit and I look, you know, just some of the abuse that, you know, hard-working, diligent journalists get when they put a story up, and there's this like swarm of, I don't know what they call trolls, I've got a few words for them, but they just swarm around these people, and they don't even have to do the difficult part of disproving anything. They just spread doubt by thousands of these mindless fucking idiots, you know, and that it's so undoubted they don't even have the burden of proof to disprove. And I think, you know, people really should be grateful for the news sources that we have. You know, that's kind of what I'd say to people very often. I hear people go, the BBC are so biased, and it's like, turn Russia Today on, and then tell me that you think the BBC are biased. You know, I think people, you know, we just have to point people in the sources. You know, the reliable journalists, we know the good sources, but we should be really careful and treasure what we have. Otherwise, the alternative is really miserable. And I kind of do spend a fair bit of time trying to point this out, that you know, it's not difficult to find your good sources, and you know, but then, you know, it's like the Wild West out there on the internet. It's terrifying.
Yeah, and I also think there's two other things that are happening. One, and I'm telling you stuff that you obviously already know, and many people in this room already know, but there's, you know, less and less money in informed bureaus, and there's less and less money in long form investigative journalism. You know, I think documentary film has sort of filled that void to some degree, but you know, support news organizations, you know, doing what Marie and Paul did. To some degree, that's a relic of the past. I mean, obviously, there's still people out there doing that in an incredible way, but not nearly as much. And you know, how long were you guys in Misrata for?
Yeah, I was going on for 3 months in one.
That almost never happens these days. And so, support journalism, keep writing stories. And I think, as much as fake news and the trolls, or whatever Paul calls them, is a scary trend, I think apathy is as scary to me. I think there's just an enormous amount of apathy with engaging with hard subjects. You know, that's what I've tried to do with my work. That's what Paul does. That's what Marie did. That's what, you know, many journalists do, is try to get people to care just for a bit and think. I'll never forget when I made City of Ghosts, this Syrian documentary about this group, Raqqas being slaughtered silently. It premiered at the Sundance Film Festival, and that was right around the time when that photo of the young Syrian boy in the ambulance, dust-covered face, was going all over the internet. And all these people were coming up to me saying, "Oh my God, can you believe what happened in Syria today?" And I said, "Oh my God, can you believe what happens in Syria every single fucking day?" And just this one photo suddenly gets you to stop and care. So keep doing what you're doing and keep telling stories, and I think that's all we can do.
Maybe one final question. I thought there was one around the middle. Right here.
So, do you feel that the Western world only listens like to Western journalists telling those stories? Because when you, for example, went to Homs, you told us that there was already this media center. Why did you think that you have to tell the story of the people there and not they themselves?
Oh, I fully encourage that's how most news comes out of Syria. That's how most news comes out of these war zones. And we can claim for being there for a very short amount of time and getting a tiny little bit of what was happening to them people. So no, the vast majority of the news that's come out of Syria, certainly since Marie was killed, because a lot of major news organisations closed down their operations and for many reasons stopped journalists going in that far. I don't think there were many other people got into the siege situation as we did then. So no, I only take credit for a tiny bit of work that we did. The vast majority of work was done but I think, we are an international newspaper that has one of the best foreign sections in the world. So I feel a bit silly getting in there and not doing it. It's what we do, but we do, we only take credit for a bit. What they went through and what they reported on long after we'd gone was the real source of most of the information that's come out,
Yeah, and I think the flip side of the double-edged sword of fake news is that anyone can have a voice, anyone can use this thing that we carry in our pocket every single day as a way to document human rights abuses, as a way to document atrocities happening around the world. So I think as foreign bureaus are shrinking, we are relying more and more on citizen journalists all around the world to tell stories, to shed light on darkness that is happening, and so I think that's a trend that'll hopefully somehow even itself out in terms of being able to decipher between what's real and what's fake. But I think largely, overwhelmingly, that's a positive thing for this world, that people all over can tell stories and to use this little device to highlight bad things that are happening and good things, hopefully. But
Well, thank you so much, Matt and Paul, for sharing your insight with us, and to everybody for coming tonight. If you're not already subscribed to get updates, newsletters and events and things from Reporters Without Borders here in Germany, please do. If you're coming through London, please look up our UK bureau, because we do lots of similar events there as well. Thank you very much.
can I just say one last thing? I just want to quickly just highlight we all are so lucky to be able to do what we do, but it's all based on organizations like Reporters Without Borders that helps create awareness for what we do. And so please, if you're not in this industry, look them up, donate to them, give them money. It's just incredible what they do. So thank you for doing what we do.
Thank you, everyone. Cheers.